So today I'll be talking to you about mentorship. This is based on my doctoral dissertation supervised by Dr. Johanna Weststar. All right. So I'll first talk about why I decided to look at mentorship in the first place. So I was really motivated by what's already happening in the industry. So there are many organizations and industries that use mentorship, not only to attract and retain their talent, but also to meet their equity, diversity, and inclusion goals. But I was really wondering, is it really a one-size-fits-all solution, or is it just a really nice thing to say that we have to cover the check boxes? Now, there is some evidence that mentorship can disrupt inequity, non-inclusion, and turnover intention, so to help these organizations with their endpoints. So there's evidence that mentorship is correlated with a sense of affiliation, suspended meta-analyses. However, there isn't really evidence showing that mentorship helps mentees in terms of their authenticity. And this is the other side of inclusion. So inclusion is really formed by two parts. Authenticity, so feeling like you can be yourself at work, but also feeling like you are part of a group and feeling like you can connect with others. There's evidence that, or there's theorization that mentorship is linked to equity. So, according to Cram's mentorship theory, mentorship should help people gain their opportunities through connections with others, build a social capital, and the like. And then, according to more recent theorization, Randall and colleagues, sponsorship, which is having a mentor tap you on the shoulder, for example, or to vouch for you behind your back, tell you there are opportunities available. This will is theorized to help people who are minoritized, especially people of um, minority minority racial ethnicities. Mentorship is already used as a retention tool in many organizations, and the research that we have right now is that it is linked to lower turnover intentions and that it is also linked to actual turnover. But a lot of this mentorship is based on the traditional model of mentorship, and that is for the goal of career development and for career progression, advancement, not necessarily for people of diverse backgrounds in which are in the workforce today. So diversity, but what about inclusion? So in the empirical literature, we do know that mentorship is effective at improving the outcomes for more than just who's been in the traditional workspace. So it has been helpful for people in gaining space and presence in managerial positions. However, with the research that's currently available, we don't really know about other jobs like skilled trades, for example, where the percentage of women is quite low, at times only 5%. We don't really know about the mentorship that happens in jobs like construction, for example. So the literature trails a bit in being able to assert mentorship as being an effective equity and inclusion strategy, and that the studies that have been done may have been based upon groups that have been traditionally holding um, places and occupations within the workforce. So this brings us to a gap that I wish to fill, and this is studying the mentorship in relation to authenticity and equity and opportunities beyond just the vertical opportunities in a workplace. So for example, in a workplace, you can also move laterally, and you can also move outside of a workplace for better opportunities. This is really what motivated my primary study, which was examining mentorship as a strategy to disrupt this inequity, non-inclusion, and labor shortage through retention. But my question was really, well, how do mentors act in inclusive mentorship? What are some behaviors, some advice we can give to mentors in these organizations that are joining these programs for mentorship, but not necessarily being given the guidance or the training? They're told, well, mentor the person. You meet with them maybe once or twice a month over a 6 period time frame, and then afterwards, what happens? And are they evaluating these outcomes? So first, it was necessary to develop a scale designed for this purpose of mentee inclusion. So whereas previous scales were designed for the purpose of career progression, this was really looking at these equity, diversity, and inclusion outcomes. So I'll briefly go over the development of the scale. So we involved mentors and mentees at first in the manufacturing industries and women in the skilled trades. So people like machinists, within the skill trades. And then eventually we broadened it to people in manufacturing in general, and then to any mentee or mentor within the workforce. And these interviews really form the basis of the behavioral items. The scale ultimately ended up with an agreement scale and then is used for self-report by mentees. I'll spare you the details of the validation process, but we underwent factor analyses, so exploratory and confirmatory factor analyses, and ultimately we developed a 30-item mentorship for inclusion scale. And in it, we found that there were two factors for mentorship for inclusion, and this was the internal factor and the external factor. Now, the internal factor is really about the behaviors between the mentor, the person guiding this less experienced or lower status person in the organization, and the mentee. And then, sorry, um, these are all within this relationship, whereas the external factor is about what happens beyond this dyad. So are they talking to other people? Kind of like sponsorship. Are they reaching out to other people, showing the mentee who's out there, who they can talk to, who's safe to talk to, how people react to them? And I'll just go into a bit more detail for that. So within internal, it's really about the care for the growth. So not only thinking about the mentee as a worker and what they can bring to the organization, how they might be able to grow, but also who are they as a person? What's going on in the rest of their lives and how can we best support the mentee in order for them to function at their highest level? But beyond that, it's also about approachability with this internal factor. So not just being a mentor for the person, but also being available for them to check in with you, having this open door for them to feel comfortable, having the psychological safety to approach you in the first place. And then with the external factor, giving access to examples. So in traditional mentorship, they really call this role modeling, but it's a bit different. So in traditional mentorship, it's about being someone that's aspirational to the mentee. However, in our interviews, what we found was it wasn't just about being aspirational or someone that the mentee wants to become like one day. It's more about physically showing them the ropes. So if, for example, they are in a skill trade, sorry, are you showing them people that they can talk to, people that won't say words that make them conjure up images of racism or sexism or other things that may make them feel uncomfortable? Are you giving them access to these examples? Not necessarily being the person that looks like them or talks like them, but someone that's in the same occupation that can guide them and really being available for them. And then also in the external factor, outreach. So this is really about who the mentor is connecting the mentee to. Are they reaching out to people in their networks? Are they reaching out to people outside of the company as well? Are they inviting them to social events, not just work events, but also going beyond this person as just someone who works for you in an organization, going a bit deeper. And then lastly, acknowledging the individual. So this is really about considering that the person has an identity outside of being your worker and looking at what kind of commitments they might have. Are they a parent? Are they also a student? And how this really influences their experience of the workplace. And in these other two factors, really keeping in mind acknowledging the individual when you're providing these internal and external behaviors. So this is just a summary of what I had just said in case anyone wants to read it through, but being approachable, being caring, providing access to examples and reaching out to others while keeping in mind the impact of the mentee's identity is really important. So ultimately, we had 30 items in our scale, and I'll briefly flash it here, but I wanted to show you some sample items. So for the internal, something that a mentor can do is reassuring the mentee that this process of adjustment is really normal. So if they're being unsure and having insecurities or need this transition moment of developing comfort, letting them know that this isn't something that's signaling they do not belong in the workplace, but that this is something people go through. The mentor also communicates a sense that the mentee will grow beyond the current role. Um, And then for external sample items, the mentee gives the mentee mentor gives the mentee opportunities to observe how others react to the mentor. So as I said before, they ask to the examples. And then the mentor involves the mentee in social activities. Now this is really the prime study that I wanted to talk to you about today. So whether or not these mentorship behaviors are predictive of then inclusion in the workplace and these perceptions of equity of opportunities. And so we measured these perceptions of equity and opportunities. We used this mentorship for inclusion scale. We looked at inclusion, looking at the two parts of inclusion, belonging and feeling value for being your authentic self, and then also looked at turnover intentions. And I want to briefly go over the participants. We had quite a diverse range of participants. So we had 450 participants gathered through social media and Prolific. We had gender diversity, racial ethnic diversity, and there are also people from not only formal mentorships, where people are paired by a group or by the organization, but also mentors that were informally paired with mentees, so people might organically reach out to each other. And what did we find? Can mentorship conjure equity? So we did find yes. However, it wasn't both the internal and the external factors that predicted this. It was only this external factor here. So what were people responding to? They're responding to, well, are there opportunities for me to move up in the company comparable to my peers? And then also comparable opportunities to move across different opportunities and then out of the sector. And can mentorship conjure inclusion? Well, yes. And thankfully, that is a yes, as organizations are already using it in their organizations. And the questions that they were responding to were, my mentor gives me the feeling that I belong, so that they're really part of the in-group. My mentor allows me to be authentic, so being able to bring their true self into work. And now, lastly, what about turnover intentions? So organizations may be using mentorship because they think, well, if I give a mentee a mentor, this person will want to stay because we've invested in them. They'll want to invest in us. And here's a bit of a spoiler alert in that there's an indirect relationship here. But I just want to tell you about some things that happened in the interviews first. So we had interviewees, the mentors and the mentees telling us, well, we don't really encourage the mentee to stay at the organization. We're just really considering what is best for them. So mentorship isn't really for retention. Here we see that inclusive mentorship, insofar as that it can predict perceived inclusion, it will then predict industry turnover intentions after receiving this mentorship. So it's saying that the mentorship that conjures these feelings of inclusion, so belonging and authenticity, this will in turn help reduce these industry turnover intentions. So negative relationship here and positive relationship here. I also had controlled for these turnover intentions that someone might have held prior to entering a mentorship. Because we know in some industries there's pretty high turnover. We just want to control for that. But you might be asking, well, why isn't there a direct relationship between mentorship and industry turnover intentions? Well, that's because there are other factors at play, right? So if you recall, when I talked about these external factors, it's a lot about people that are outside of the mentorship. So who's being introduced to the mentee, are they actually reacting well to the mentor themselves? And what are the cues that the mentee is being given? So in the cases of my interviewees, most of them were having inclusive mentorships, but they were also describing these best case scenarios. And that, well, yes, my mentor showed me all these people, they were wonderful, they're friendly to them, they're friendly to me. But we can also see in some situations where you may have a mentor, but they may not necessarily give you an inclusive mentorship. They may be kind of low on or they may provide you inclusive mentorship, but there may be other factors at play, like the climate at work. It may be a toxic environment at work. There may be selective individuals outside of the mentorship that can influence the ultimate turnover intentions outside of the mentorship. All right, so let's discuss this a little bit. I think I have a bit more time. So what have we really found here? So I've presented this two-factor framework in showing that there are different behaviors that you might want to engage in depending on the outcomes that you want. So even within mentorship is pretty broad. So there are these internal behaviors that you can partake in. So really caring about the growth of the individual and then also being very approachable to them, validating what they're going through. But on the other hand, you may want to partake in external functions if your goal is really to provide equity, perceived equity and opportunity. So these were not the opportunities that people ultimately received. but this was their perceptions of equity at the end of the day. So after receiving this mentorship, did they feel like what they where they could go was similar to their peers? And so knowing this, we can set goals, whether it's in program wide or individual mentors and mentees, so that the mentors can enact the appropriate behaviors to reach these set of goals. And then, of course, we have this mentorship for inclusion scale, which has a wide list of the behaviors that the mentors can enact in. And this can provide a reference point for mentors that are a bit unsure of what they can provide for the mentees. Um, And ultimately, mentorship is really one piece of a larger puzzle. So I said, can mentorship conjure all these great things? Well, the mentor is just the magician. You also need the smoke, the mirrors, the lighting, the audience, right? The audience, who are you interacting with? And so mentorship um, doesn't operate in isolation. And this study does provide support that individual level action, like mentors, can do some good. They can facilitate this work and inclusion, but we recognize that it is a bit limited in scope because of what these behaviors entail. And that is really going out there in the world with the mentee and talking with them, introducing them to people, going into different social environments where there are some variables that they cannot control. But what can organizations do? So we can really support more in the organizations, and help the mentor carry out these actions. So some of these things that the mentors do may require resources by the organizations, for example, time. So availability provided to the mentee. Is the mentor really able to provide so many check-ins when they themselves have their own tasks at hand? He can teach the or give teach the mentor how to navigate certain situations. So, for example, if a mentor has never been through certain experiences of harassment um, or sexism, for example, or these intersectional challenges, how can they then help ready the individual mentee so we can help them navigate the situations so that they don't just walk in without any resources? And then finally, have awareness of the context that they're going into. So, like other interventions and like other presentations today have talked about, we do need structural supports as well as individual action. And some things that can change are really having policies in place. So it doesn't really rely on individual goodwill of every mentor, changing of the practices in place, and also changing of the norms. So really, inclusivity requires this backdrop. So the smoke, the mirrors, the stage, the curtains, which are the inclusive climate, and also having the policies to help these individual actions be facilitated. So thank you so much for listening today, and I'm available for questions.